everybody. Welcome to Rachel's Reviews. This is our January 2021 episode of Female Film Critics Speak Out panel. And today I have some really fun guests from across the seas. It's very exciting over at the UK. And I have Orla Smith is here from Seventh Row and other publications. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Yes. And I have Caz from Let's Go to the Movies here.
Hi, looking forward to talking to everyone today.
Yes, thank you so much both for coming on and talking with us. And I want to give you each just a chance to introduce yourself to our audience. This is the second time, Orla, I think, that you've been on my show. It's been a little while though.
Yeah, a couple of years.
Yeah, that we talked about indie films. And but if you both could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do and your blogs or where you write for, and or like when do you start?
Sure. I am the executive editor of Seventh Row, which is actually a Canadian film website and publishing house. I've been to Canada once. I'm not Canadian, but it just sort of like happened that I started working for them through the magic of the internet. And so we publish stuff online. We publish books 3 times a year, ebooks. And we have a podcast, the Seventh Row podcast, and I'm on basically every episode. So if you want to hear other podcasty things, you can listen to that. And I'm also a freelance writer, and I write for the film stage regularly, and I've written for a bunch of other places.
Guys, what about you?
Well, basically, I run my own sort of film blog, Let's Go to the Movies, and I'm coming up to 12 years of blogging now. And it basically just started because I would go to the cinema all the time, sort of loved watching films and thought, I'm going to write about them and do reviews and do lists. And I've just kept going and continue doing it. And it's been really good, especially sort of the past year, being part of the online Female Film Critics Association. I've had screeners as well, so that's sort of like quite a new thing for me. So especially with the cinemas being closed, that's absolutely fantastic, getting to see new films.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole runaround in order to get screeners can be exhausting, but it's definitely it's small violins because it's definitely a blessing, especially this last year. And just being able to have so much content it's amazing. You think it would be maybe hard to find stuff to review in 2020, but I didn't find that to be the case. It was just a little bit different.
Yeah, I found that it's like, in some ways it's become kind of more accessible to review films because I know before, especially since I'm covering like films for their Canadian and US release dates mostly, some publicists would want you to go to like press screenings in person that I just physically could not go to, but then they also wouldn't provide screeners at all. And now this year, everyone has to provide screeners. There's no excuse not to, which has helped me a lot. Yeah.
And is the Seventh Row, is that specifically indie films, or is it more than that?
Well, I think we mostly focus on, there's not really any specific restrictions on what we cover, but we do have our own interests and we don't cover everything. We cover any things that we're like interested in. And we're run by myself and Alex Heaney, who I work with. And we're both kind of like mostly interested in like films by and about women, not exclusively, but I mean, they appeal to us as women. We're interested in world cinema, independent cinema, and that's what we tend to write about and what we tend to like get other people to write about. So yeah, I mean, you're not likely to see anything like blockbustery on our site just because we don't feel like we have anything kind of interesting to add to that conversation, or it doesn't interest us.
Right. So Caz, how did you get started loving film and watching film?
It probably all started with Lord of the Rings. Sort of when those came out, and then when the extended editions came out on sort of DVD back in those days, I just became like obsessed with how it was made and watched all the special features, and that was kind of when it sort of first started. And then obviously over the years it's just sort of grown, and then you catch up with older films and you realize like how good some of those were as well. And I don't know, there's just always loads of things to watch and catch up with.
That's true. There's always, you can never watch everything, even in 2020. You can't. I mean, especially if you're talking about television. I mean, it's, I feel like every day there's somebody tells me about a series that, oh, you got to watch this series. And I'm like, there's already 5 seasons of that. How do I?
That has become harder to keep up with, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But I did watch, I caught up with The Sopranos in 2020.
Okay.
It's a big feat.
So I eventually caught up with that. So
I
that was
finally watched Stranger Things season 3. That was very exciting. But last year, I took me like over a year from when it aired. But what do you think that female writers and female critics have to kind of add to the critical landscape out there? What do you think our perspective is important and needed? What do you think, Orla?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like essential for like very obvious surface reasons, of course, because like women are a big portion of the population,
right?
And I think that like everyone has unconscious biases about what films that they're attracted to. So I'd say that like Seventh Row, for example, we mostly write about films directed by women, and it's not because we're like necessarily trying to only write about films directed by women, but it's because we're run by 2 women, so we naturally gravitate towards those kinds of stories. And I think if like most films that's run by men and work like mostly men write for them, and so you're like naturally going to have an unconscious bias there with regards to what films they're attracted to, and obviously with that stretched over like decades and decades of film criticism and film discourse has resulted in the canon of great films being mostly men. And as female critics, the more kind of prevalent we become, slowly I think we're tipping the scale back the other way, and that's what I find exciting about it.
A while back they did this classic cinema series, and over at our local theater, and just every single movie was so machismo. I felt like I'm like, who picked out this series? And particularly I thought that Cool Hand Luke, I'm not saying it's a bad film, but I thought that it was very, very, I don't know, just very machismo about it, everything about it. And I don't know, I'm trying to remember, there was like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Dirty Dozen, and just everything was very like brofest. And I was like, we need to get some help in this, whoever's planning this. But there's definitely that feel sometimes when you're watching some of these classic lists where if they have female centric films, they're very like the ingenue kind of a thing, or sort of they're not the more complex written characters that you like to see.
And there are like a few like female directors throughout history that people are like, well, those are the ones that we'll include to show that we're inclusive. But it's sort of like when you look beyond that, there's so much more that has kind of been erased. Like it's harder to find under the radar films by women throughout film history because they've kind of been buried in discourse and ignored. So it's important to like try and look past that, but it's very difficult. It's a lot of undoing.
Yeah. Caz, what do you think when you're reading different reviews and other critics? Do you find yourself gravitating towards female voices, male voices? Or do you think it's basically the same? What do you think?
I think for certain films, when there's obviously going to be sort of a bit of a difference in how men and women see it, I like to see if sort of obviously other women have felt the same way I have. So I think the big one's going to be when more people see Promising Young Woman.
Yeah,
right. That's a good example.
I'm really interested to see how men are going to take that film, because I think some are going to just like hate it because they're going to feel attacked by it. So I think sort of with things like that, it's important. And then again, even with sort of the big blockbusters and superhero sort of films, I think women are being more accepted that they like them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas obviously before it's always like, oh well, yeah, the men do this. A bit like sort of Ghostbusters as well. I still always feel like that got attacked because they were all women, and I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Do you know? So I think there was like a big sort of, still a big gender sort of difference in that. But something I did notice from a lot of the films that I watched in 2020 was how powerful the female performances were.
Mm-hmm.
So I usually put together a list of like top 25 performances, and I probably could put a bigger list together for females than I could for males this year. And I think like the Oscars is going to be probably one of the toughest years, because there's probably already 5 performances I could think to be nominated straight away, and I probably haven't seen all the films yet. So I think we'll have seen a big shift.
Yeah, and I feel like it seems like almost every year, I feel like that's the way it is. Like Best Actress is always just so tough, and the Best Actor is usually not as tough for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I feel like that's true. But yeah, there are some really strong contenders this year, whether it's Viola Davis or Vanessa Kirby or Carey Mulligan. I think they're pretty strong contenders going up. But do you find, you being over in the UK, do you find that sometimes there's a disconnect at all between films that are getting a lot of hype here in the States, and then either you don't see them till way later, so they don't get that hype there, or maybe you've already seen them, or it's just different? What do you think, Orla?
I mean, UK release dates are definitely like a bane of the existence of many UK film fans. We get stuff so much later, and since I've been writing for Seventh Row More, I'm a bit lucky that I'm often getting to see films when they come out there, especially this year when everything's screeners. But then I can't recommend it to anyone until it comes out, and some things don't even get distribution. In fact, like one of my favorite films of 2020 was First Cow, and I did a lot of coverage of it too, because we did a big project on it, so I managed to get a screener sort of early last year. And that film, not only has it not come out in the UK, it hasn't got a distributor here. And it has no like release on the horizon, and that happens with several really great films every single year.
Does A24 not release there?
No, they have a few people who often like release their films, like Altitude Distribution releasing like Minari here, and they release Moonlight and a bunch of other A24 films, but for some reason not this one. Maybe they're waiting for theaters to become more of a thing again, but like as far as we know, there's no deal. And I'm lucky to have seen it, but I know a lot of people who haven't. And so there's definitely a disconnect. I mean, again, my head is kind of in Canada at the moment, especially since I'm not leaving my house. It's a big problem. I mean, we live in like a very global world, and I don't understand why things aren't more synced up at this point.
I agree. I think that it's kind of crazy that, I mean, especially as we're getting these streaming services, that if we're going to have, Disney Plus and other things, they need to be everywhere. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's just weird that can't happen. You think some place like Disney, with the reach they have, could make that happen at least.
Yeah, and we don't have Criterion Channel here either, which is definitely a thing that I would want.
I think Sky Cinema over here puts a big block on everything, doesn't it? Because that's why we got Disney Plus late, because they owned like a lot of the rights to the films, and that's why we haven't got HBO Max, because they've got certain films, and then it's sort of, I don't know, it causes quite a bit of problems. But I have noticed over the past few weeks they have a premiere on every day, and it's actually been like quite a good film most days, quite quick from the cinema release as well.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Like smaller films as well.
Have you found that, Caz, that there's sometimes films that get really popular in the States and they just don't ring the same over there?
I think, yeah, sometimes because of the hype. So if you hear so much about a film and then you're really excited to see it and you're kind of a bit like, oh, is that it?
Yeah.
Like that happens
You're waiting a
sometimes.
year and a half to see it.
Yeah. And then
Well,
you're just a bit like, oh.
I feel like that's going to be a problem for all of us with these 2021 releases because, some of these films now have had 3-4 marketing cycles. So we're waiting and I feel like it's just setting us up to be disappointed. It's something I'm definitely thinking a lot about as a critic, trying to kind of be cognizant of that so that I don't let my expectations, because I think that was, Wonder Woman 84 had lots of problems, but I do think part of the backlash against it was partly due to it being disappointing because people had been hyped up for it now like for over a year. And so I think that certainly didn't help it, at least. Let's say that. And I feel like the Bond movie is going to face the same thing. I think Dune's going to face the same thing. I mean, how many times can you kind of be built up and hyped for something and then it be delayed and then it delayed and delayed and delayed?
Well, with Wonder Woman, that's only been released on VOD today in the UK.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that.
So there's even like sort of bigger thing with that. I luckily I got a screener last week.
What'd you think?
I enjoy parts of it.
Yeah.
I think that's like, as you said though, because of people talking about it, I managed to get no spoilers, but because everyone was sort of like, I don't know if it was like, as you said, because it took so long to get released, everyone was waiting for it. But I don't know. I still felt a lot of the criticism was harsh on it though.
Yeah.
Because it was never going to be as good as the first one.
Right.
They sort of broke the mold with that first one.
Overall, I liked it. It was disappointing, but and it has its problems, but I just like Gal so much as that character, and I just like the character so much that I enjoyed it. It's not perfect, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's just something I think we have to watch out for this year, particularly for all of us that are in film. Do you find that your opinions on films have changed a lot as you've gotten older? That films that you used to like in your early 20s, you're kind of like, I don't know. I mean, you both are a lot younger than me, but still.
I mean, even then, just a few years distance from a film can really change your perspective on it. And I feel like I've kind of disavowed any opinion that I had like longer than 4 or 5 years ago. I'm like, well, I feel like I have to watch that again before I can say if it's good or bad. There are so many films where I feel like that way. Like years ago, I watched the Norwegian film Oslo August 31st and did really like it. And then I started working for Seventh Row, and Alex, my colleague, it's like her favorite film. She adores it. And I watched it again like a couple of weeks ago for a project we were doing on it for a podcast. And I absolutely loved it. I adored it. And I feel like it just like that happens with so many films where kind of my relationship with cinema has changed. The more films you watch, the easier it is to kind of read a film and to meet it on its level, especially with world cinema, where you kind of it's a different language, different countries and different areas of the world have like a different approach to cinema that you might not be used to. So yeah, I mean, I think, and also I've become better at like articulating why a film doesn't work and why a film does work, I think, especially after being a film critic and being forced to kind of like get your thoughts down in a way that makes sense to people rather than just like an amorphous blob of adjectives. So yeah, absolutely. I think that like every year changes my relationship with films.
And when you're watching something for a podcast, it really does impact your appreciation for even a flawed film. That I don't know, you just notice things and you're taking notes, and it's just a different experience. I even recently, not too long ago, did a podcast on The Little Mermaid for my Talking Disney podcast, and I mean, I've seen that movie so many times since I was a little girl. And, but I don't think I'd ever really taken notes as I watched it. And that was a different experience. It's really, I don't know. It's interesting. It adds a lot. I wouldn't want to watch all movies that way, but it is an interesting way to watch movies.
Yeah.
Well, I tried to rewatch the animated Dumbo when the new one came out, and I had to turn it off after the first like 10 minutes. I couldn't get past like.
Oh really?
I was like, I was like, how did I watch that as a kid? I was like, that's horrible. I was like, that's horrible. I was like, I can't watch anymore. So I like turned it off.
Yeah.
So,
one that I liked so much better after when I was in college, I did not like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I thought, oh, this is boring. I don't like it. But then I watched it a couple of years ago, and I think I might have even seen it at the theater. I can't remember. And I loved it. It really worked for me, and it wasn't boring anymore. And I thought that it had something to say about kind of about news and the way we report things and the way we believe people, and just how desperate they were to try to convince people that what they had seen was real, and how nobody believed them. And so it worked on just a different level to me as an adult than what it did as, as a adult college student. So that was one for sure for me. And then, of course you have others that you're like, oh, I liked this. Okay. All right.
And I feel like when I was younger, we were talking about like the canon earlier, like the films people tell you were great films.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I was younger, if I watched one of those films and I didn't really like connect with it, I was more likely to try and convince myself that actually I did like it.
Right.
And when I didn't really, because I felt like, but that's the right opinion. I'm supposed to like this. So I need to like twist my brain around to find ways in which I'm wrong and actually it is great. And I feel like there's so much I have to revisit because of that.
That's Blade Runner for me. I convinced myself that even though I didn't really like it, my first review when I was just starting, I just was in like a pretzel to try to convince myself this was a good movie. And I understand why other people like it, but now I read that review and I'm just like, oh, that was bad. Because I wasn't really saying how I really felt. I was saying about how pretty it was and everything, like, which is true, but yeah, man, that movie's hard for me to get through. The pacing is very, very difficult for me, still to this day.
Yeah, but I feel like now I've learned to like own my controversial opinions.
Yes,
I have many of them every year, and I'm proud of them.
I love that. Yeah, that's good. So we have coming up, the Sundance Film Festival is coming up. And so I thought it would be fun to talk about Sundance or just film festivals in general, independent film, and to talk about our experiences with that coming up. And I had my two. We always do a unpopular opinion and a review that we're proud of. And so mine, for both of those, I decided to pick a Sundance film because there's always that festival darling that everybody loves and that you watch and you're like, I didn't love it. And one of those for me was Brittany Runs a Marathon. And this was a won all these awards at Sundance. People loved it. And I thought that it was not good at all. I thought that she was really, really unlikable and unpleasant. And I thought that I would love it because I have been a plus size athlete in my life. Like I've done open water swims, and so I've dealt with some of the same things that she dealt with. So I thought that I would love it. And I just found her so grating and unlikable. And I wished that I could have rooted for anybody else in the movie I liked better than her. And I don't know. I just didn't find her journey interesting, or I don't know. So that was an unpopular opinion that I had of a festival movie or an indie movie. Orla, have you had anything kind of like that?
Yes, lots.
Yeah.
I have lots of films that I'm not convinced by that a lot of people love, although to be more positive, I'll pick a film that I really loved that not a lot of people did from this last year, which was Ammonite, which is a film that was on like my top 5 or 10 of the year. I really loved it. I love Francis Lee's last film, and I interviewed him, and he's such a fascinating guy. And what I really loved about it is that, I mean, I guess I think the marketing hurt it in a sense that it was marketed as like this sweeping romance, when really I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I mean, I think it's about a relationship and about the sort of class power dynamics in that relationship. And it's really, really rare to see a British period piece that's actually about like working class characters. Because most British period pieces are just sort of like people in beautiful ball gowns in huge houses. And this one was kind of like, people were right to call it bleak, because I mean, it's about a character. She has like 3 dresses. One dress she works in, it's caked in mud and it's covered in holes. I interviewed the costume designer as well, because I love the costumes in it, because I think that I love the costumes not because they're like beautiful in the conventional period piece way, but because they're so rich with detail, and you learn so much about Mary Anning's life, who's this British paleontologist from the 19th century, who Kate Winslet plays in the film. And the film is really more a portrait of her and her life as a working class woman than it is about the romance. And the romance is also like a very interesting way in to talk about class, because she has a romance with a more upper class woman played by Saoirse Ronan, and it's a very intimate relationship, and it works in this kind of like over this isolated period of a few weeks for certain reasons, but then when we're out of kind of that like isolated period in the real world, there's a relationship that doesn't work, and the film grapples with that in a really complex way. So I really appreciated that about it. It's actually not come out in the UK yet either, because for some reason we don't get British films at the same time as America does.
Which is crazy.
It comes out in February or March. Yeah.
I can give you one where I caught up with at the end of last year.
Yeah, let's know.
Highlander.
What's it called?
Highlander.
Uh-huh.
I caught up with that, and like everyone's saying it's amazing and it's great and it's a cult classic, and I just thought it was terrible. I just thought it was absolutely terrible. I was like, why am I watching this film? I was like, it's so bad. I was like, what?
I'm picking that for my blind spot in April. That's gonna be interesting. Yeah.
I just throw in as well about Brittany Runs a Marathon, that I absolutely loved it and cried, because I ran the New York Marathon in 2018. So like the part where like she's on like the start line, it just brought back all the amazing memories of doing the race, and I just like cried. But I can understand why you didn't like her as a person, because she wasn't very likable.
I can be like the neutral ground here, because I haven't seen Highlander or Brittany Runs a Marathon. So I can disagree with either of you.
Well, you have to let us know if you get to see it. See either.
Well, it was on Amazon Prime at one point. I'm not sure if it's still on there.
Yeah, the film, it's always fun to, when you go to a film festival and you find that sort of little film that you can champion. And I've had a bunch of those over the years of covering Sundance. And one was the documentary Step, that I absolutely loved, about a team in Baltimore. And it was really about the girls. It wasn't really about dance. And I just thought it was great. I was so mad that it didn't get nominated. But the documentary branch is so bad. They never nominate the good stuff. I also loved, which also didn't get nominated, I also loved the documentary Maiden, about the first all-women racing sailboat racing in the race around the world. So good, so inspiring. And then another one, we'll see if it gets nominated, but I'm highly doubtful. Last year at Sundance, I loved the documentary Dick Johnson is Dead. Did you see that, Orla?
Yeah, I interviewed Kristen Johnson about it, and I think that's probably my favorite interview I did all last year, because she is just a lovely, lovely person, and she's so interesting. Like whatever you ask her, she'll come up with something like fascinating that you'd never thought of to say. She's just as lovely as you'd hope she'd be from the documentary, and from her dad, who is also wonderful. And no, I'm a big fan of that film.
I loved it. It's so creative, and I don't doesn't surprise me at all for you to say that, because she was the best at Sundance. I mean, she was going up and down the rows. She was taking questions. She was talking to everybody. She was so fun. It was one of the best panels I've ever been to at Sundance. I loved the movie, but I loved her too, and I just loved her family. And it's very creative because they have all these sort of, it's about her processing her father's death before he's actually dead, and they have all these sort of mock deaths scenes, and so it kind of mixes dramatic with documentary in a very creative way. And so that's one that I definitely have really been championing, that I loved.
And that's come on to Netflix last year, which is great. Now it's very accessible.
Yes, people should see it. And so I always have people, when they come on to talk about a review that you've done that you're proud of, that you really like, you think it's well written. And so I'm curious what you thought of. Orla, what's one that you thought of?
It's a difficult question. And I thought, well, we might as well throw in another unpopular opinion along with the review. Probably the review, I've read a bunch of reviews that I'm happy with, but probably the one that's like from last year that brought me the most attention is a review of a Mexican film that I did at TIFF called New Order. And it became like a big talk of TIFF because it was sort of, and it likely will be nominated for a foreign language Oscar. And people were using like the logline, like, this is the Mexican Parasite, to get people to watch it, which kind of like ignores all the complex things Parasite was doing that this film absolutely isn't doing. I really, really hated it. It's like incredibly over the top and violent for no reason. It's just incredibly sadistic. And I know a lot of people were sort of raving about it, when I think it's really like edgy, but it's not saying anything. And it's almost kind of borderline offensive. So I didn't like it, as you can tell. And I wrote this review kind of explaining why I didn't like it. And then when the Mexican trailer for the film came out, that review kind of went viral on Mexican film Twitter. I had like, for like 2 weeks, my people were quoting my review in Spanish. I sort of, I mean, most people were sort of like agreeing with me, so that's good. I got a couple of people who were calling it bad, and then eventually there was like an article about the film and the uproar it caused in The Guardian, and my review was quoted there. It was on Seventh Row, the review, and it basically for 2 months made up like half of our viewing numbers. So I'm very thankful for that. And I am proud of that review, because I think that I managed to, rather than just like screaming about how much I didn't like the film, kind of reason why it was bad with actual like filmmaking examples that are difficult to dispute. And I'm glad that I made a solid argument, because now it's being shared around, so I can use that as evidence rather than having to defend myself.
Yeah, so you didn't fall into just hyperbole, that you had an argument, you had solid reasons why. I think that's really important. Caz, what about you? What's something that you've written that you're really proud of, that you think is a well-written review?
I kind of picked quite a recent review. I eventually caught up and watched Educating Rita with Julie Walters and Michael Caine, which I'd never seen before. And I kind of like, I loved the film. And then as I was writing, I think I then got that across in sort of a more gushing type review. And it kind of made us think about what we were talking about earlier about the different female performances. And like Julie Walters got an amazing character in that film.
Julie Walters, she's the best.
It kind of made us think like, if you find the right films from different time periods, there's still some good female roles there. but kind of like everything that's about is that there wasn't any, but you can find them. And I think that was sort of one of them. So I was really proud of sort of that review and just how much I sort of loved the film, eventually catching up with it after so many years.
I'll have to watch that. I haven't seen it. But
it was their film debut as well, Julie Walters.
Oh, really?
Wow.
It was her first film she was in. She'd just done sort of TV and theatre before that. And I think she was 28.
I feel like she's kind of underrated now because she's so much in everything that people underappreciate how good she really is. But like she was in Wild Rose a couple of years ago and I loved her so much in that. I wish she'd gotten like Oscar attention for that because it's like
that's what I was going to talk about is my review of the movie that I'm proud of because it was just such a great experience, and especially now that we can't go to the theater very much. The art house theater is closed here in Salt Lake, but I just went to the theater and I said I was gonna just see whatever, was gonna go the whole day and see whatever the art house theater had for me. And one of those movies was Wild Rose, and I just absolutely loved it. I mean, I went in knowing nothing about it. And I loved it. And I loved Julie Walters' performance. I think that she deserved a nomination. I thought she was so good because that movie could have so easily been just your sort of classic sort of judgmental parent who doesn't, who's holding back the dreamer, but that's not what it was. I mean, she'd actually been raising her children. She was worried about her daughter, that she would get kind of lost in this dream. And she says, how much more are you willing to sacrifice for it? And so it was such a more nuanced discussion than what you typically see with just sort of the overbearing parent kind of role. And she was so good. And I love Jessie Buckley so much. And I loved the music. I just couldn't believe that none of the music got nominated. I mean, I did because it's the Oscars, but I mean
all the songs they actually nominated were just kind of meh. And then the songs from that are great.
Yeah. So that was one of my favorites.
Jessie Buckley's backstory is so good as well because she started out on a UK talent show for I'd do anything to find the next Nancy.
And I remember watching that at the time.
Yeah, I feel like sort of like a proud relative watching her because like you've seen her sort of like grow up and now she's getting these amazing roles.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Another movie that I had a great experience with this year, and this is kind of more my podcast, but was the movie Words on Bathroom Walls.
I watched that yesterday.
Oh, you do? Yeah, it's not like perfect or anything, but I thought it was really good. And particularly there's a moment where Walter Goggins writes the Charlie Plummer character a letter, and that waterworks. It really got me.
I did cry at that bit.
It was so good, especially because you're not expecting, to me at least, Walter Goggins, I'm immediately expecting him to be a villain. And so for the fact that he had this heel turn, I was like, oh, that was such smart casting. Very good. Anyway, and so when I was writing about it, I said in my review, I said I would really like to talk to somebody with schizophrenia to see what they think about the movie, because I have no idea like how they would respond to it, right? And so I said that, and somebody actually responded and sent me an email, this young man named Zach. And I started talking with him and I said, hey, would you like to come on my podcast? We can talk about the movie and talk about your experience, because I think the whole stigmas around mental illness like that is just so ridiculous and I hate it. And so anyway, I had him on my podcast and we had a great discussion. It was super empowering. And then the director, Tor Frudenthal, was listening to our episode, and then he came on my podcast. And so it was just ended up being this super positive, wonderful experience based on my review and my experience with the movie. And so and that's something that's so cool that we can do now, with everybody being so much more easy to access than used to. You'd only be able to have like a junket. You might be able to talk to somebody, and now, or maybe a phone call, but now we have so many other ways to connect with people that you can make a really incredible experience. with, whether it be just talking with somebody else that enjoyed the film, or whether talking even with people involved. That can be a really, even just on Twitter saying, hey, I really loved your movie. That can be a really cool experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like lockdown has allowed some stuff like that in an interesting way. Like at Seventh Row, we were thinking about what we could do for lockdown programming, and we thought the idea of doing live streams every week with two filmmakers who like didn't know each other but had like maybe similar preoccupations or worked in a similar field, and just have them talk to each other for an hour. And it's something you could never do if the world wasn't like at a standstill. But it ended up being so interesting because everyone was at home. We could get people kind of scheduled at the right time, and we had so many interesting conversations. And then by the end of that series, we ended up having like people that I would have never imagined we could have gotten on, who we did because they were free. Like we had Mike Lee on, which is like pretty amazing. And we just emailed his agent and then somehow managed to arrange it. And it's, as much as last year has been pretty awful, I think that it has like allowed, I think people have made the most of it in allowing for some conversations to happen, and allowing for connections to happen that wouldn't have otherwise been possible.
Yeah. I mean, guys, you did a lot of rewatches this year before the theaters closed, right?
Yeah.
You went.
I am. I eventually got to see Lord of the Rings, obviously, which you mentioned earlier, extended editions on the big screen.
That's
and
so
I went
cool.
twice within 10 days.
Wow.
Because Odeon had it on, and then Cineworld put it on. So I was like, well, I have to go back again and do them all again.
You saw the whole series twice?
Yeah.
That's a lot of hours.
I did Fellowship in Two Towers on one day and then Return of the King the next, because I thought Two Towers to Return of the King, that is like heavy going. So that was how it sort of split. They didn't sort of put them on early enough to have it all in one day, which I think probably would have been a bit more brutal. But yeah, like that was sort of like kind of probably one of the best things to come from the whole lockdown in the cinemas, because probably would never have screened them up here. Right. I know there's a small cinema in London that does it in a day, but I probably would never have got that opportunity. Yeah. And then I think what else did I caught up with Bill and Ted. I'd never seen that before, and I saw that for the first time at the cinema. And then I did Rocky IV and Rocky Balboa randomly. I don't know why they had random Rocky films on sometimes.
Yeah, I was able to see a bunch of the classics on a lot of the drive-in that they had here. I saw Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, Jaws, Empire Strikes Back, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the original Avengers, Slumdog Millionaire, which I love, E.T., Nightmare Before Christmas, Harry Potter, the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, part 1 or part 2. So yeah, that was pretty fun. That was a nice part about the year, is that getting to see some of these classics. But anyway, well, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. This was really fun. I really enjoyed hearing about your experiences, and so I really appreciate you coming on and joining the podcast.
Yeah, it's been really amazing. Thanks.
So, Caz, how can people find you and your blog?
My blog is letsgotothemovies.co.uk, and on Twitter I'm at letsgotothemov7.
Great. And Orla, what about you?
Well, you can find Seventh Row at seventh-row.com or at Seventh Row on Twitter. And then with me, you can find my writing. My portfolio is just orlasmith.com and at Orla Mango on Twitter.
Great. We'll have all that information in the description section, and we'll definitely have to have you both on again. Maybe once we're able to do some best and worst, or if you're all able to see any of the Sundance films, that might be fun. So this was great. And let us know in the comments section if you have any thoughts about all the different things that we talked about. We'd love to hear, or on Twitter. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. And you can also find me at the Hallmarkies podcast. So take a look over there. And I'm going to be covering Sundance for rotoscopers.com. And I'm going to be interviewing every animator, whether short or feature film, that's submitting to Sundance, that's featuring at Sundance, that I can get in contact with. I'm trying my best. And so that's going to be over there at Rotoscopers. And
that's ambitious.
So it's, yeah. Yes, it's gonna be fun. I'm excited. So check that out. And thanks again. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk again soon. Bye, everybody.